The diagnosis came on a Tuesday, stage 3 ovarian cancer. I remember staring at the scan results, my medical training warring with my emotions as I processed what those dark masses meant. After 12 years as an oncologist, I was used to delivering this news to patients. Being on the receiving end was something else entirely. David, my husband of 15 years, gripped my hand as Dr. Chen explained the treatment plan. Surgery, followed by aggressive chemotherapy. The protocol was familiar. I prescribed it countless times myself. But the cost estimates made my stomach clench. Even with insurance, we were looking at nearly $200,000 out of pocket. "We'll figure it out," David promised that night, holding me as I finally let myself cry. "We have savings, my parents are well off, and you've helped so many patients over the years. We're not alone in this." I should have known better. Should have remembered how his parents, Richard and Margaret Thompson, had reacted when we got married. They'd wanted him to marry the banker's daughter they'd picked out, not a common doctor, as they called me. The fact that I treated cancer patients instead of managing wealth was, in their eyes, proof that I lacked ambition. "We've set aside $85,000 in retirement savings," I told David the next morning, my laptop open to our financial records. "The house has some equity we could borrow against. If your parents could help with even part of the remaining cost." He nodded, already reaching for his phone. "Let me call them. They've been better lately, and this is literally life and death. They'll help." I listened to his side of the conversation, watching his face fall as his mother's voice grew loud enough for me to hear through the speaker. "Absolutely not." Margaret's crisp tone cut through the air. "Do you know what the market's doing right now? We can't risk our portfolio on experimental treatments." "Mom, Sarah is one of the top oncologists in the state. These aren't experimental treatments. This is standard cancer care. We're not asking for the whole amount just." "If she's such a good doctor," Richard's voice interrupted, "why doesn't she have better insurance or more savings?" "Honestly, David, this is what happens when you marry beneath your station." David's hands were shaking when he ended the call. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'll keep trying. Maybe if I explain it better." But I had already made up my mind. "We'll use the retirement savings," I said quietly, "and I'll keep working as long as I can during treatment. We'll find a way." The next few weeks were a blur of preparations. I arranged coverage for my patients, scheduled the surgery, and tried to organize our finances. That's when we discovered the first betrayal. "What do you mean the retirement account is empty?" David stared at the bank statement in horror. "That's impossible. We just checked it last week." A call to the bank confirmed the transfer. $85,000 moved to an account in Richard and Margaret's name. David's signature on the transfer papers. They said it was for a real estate investment. David's voice cracked. "A guaranteed return. They promised we'd have the money back with interest in 6 months. I thought it would help us pay for your treatment." I sat heavily in my office chair, the room spinning slightly. "When did you sign the papers?" "Last month." They said timing was crucial. "I wanted to surprise you with the extra money." He looked up, tears in his eyes. "I'll get it back. I'll make them return it." But Richard and Margaret were immovable. The money was safely invested and couldn't be liquidated without substantial penalties. When David threatened legal action, they reminded him that he had signed the transfer papers willingly. "Don't be dramatic," Margaret said during one heated phone call. "Sarah's a doctor. Surely she has colleagues who can treat her at a discount." "That's how these things work, isn't it? Professionals helping professionals?" I took the phone from David's trembling hand. "Actually, Margaret, that's not how cancer works. But thank you for the suggestion, and thank you for showing us exactly who you are when it matters most." We sold our car, took out a second mortgage, and I worked double shifts between my surgery and the start of chemotherapy. My colleagues were incredible, adjusting the treatment schedule so I could continue seeing patients, sharing their research opportunities to help with the costs. Through it all, Richard and Margaret maintained their distance, sending the occasional text to David checking on their investment, but never once asking about my health. They didn't visit after my surgery, didn't call during my first brutal round of chemo, didn't acknowledge any of the updates David faithfully sent them. I lost my hair in clumps, watching it fall in the shower and trying not to see it as a metaphor for everything else we were losing. The house we loved, now mortgaged to the hilt. The retirement savings we carefully built. The relationship with David's family that had always been strained but was now irreparably broken. But I also found strength I didn't know I had. Between treatments, I continued my research into innovative cancer therapies. My patients became my support system, their courage inspiring me to keep fighting. Many of them had faced similar financial struggles, and their stories gave me an idea. Dr. Chen caught me working late one night, poring over grant applications and business proposals. "Sarah," she said gently, "you should be resting." "I can't," I replied, gesturing to the papers spread across my desk. "Look at these statistics. Do you know how many cancer patients bankrupt themselves getting treatment? How many have to choose between life-saving care and keeping their homes? The system is broken." She sat down, examining my proposals with growing interest. A sliding scale oncology center? With an integrated financial counseling department? It's ambitious. It's necessary, I said, my voice firm despite my exhaustion. I've been talking to investors, other oncologists, patient advocacy groups. We could create something revolutionary. A place where treatment decisions are based on medical needs, not bank accounts. Dr. Chen was silent for a long moment. "The medical group has been looking to expand," she said finally. "Present this to the board. I'll back you." That conversation marked a turning point. Between chemotherapy sessions, I refined my proposal. During long nights when pain kept me awake, I worked on financial projections. My patients shared their stories, offering powerful testimony to the need for change. Other doctors, tired of seeing patients struggle, pledged their support. 6 months into my treatment, two major things happened. First, my scans came back showing significant tumor reduction. The chemotherapy was working. And second, the medical group's board approved my proposal for a new oncology center with unanimous support. The next few months passed in a whirlwind of activity. I completed my treatment while simultaneously overseeing plans for the new center. We secured additional funding from private investors and healthcare reform advocates. My vision of an oncology center that prioritized both medical and financial health was becoming reality. David threw himself into the project, his background in business administration proving invaluable as we navigated permits and regulations. He never spoke about his parents, but I knew he was still sending them updates, still hoping they might show some sign of remorse or concern. Then, exactly 1 year after my diagnosis, my phone lit up with Margaret's number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Sarah?" Her voice sounded different, frightened, unsure. We need to talk. Can we meet?" "Why?" My voice was cool, professional, the same tone I used with difficult patients. "Please," she said, and I heard tears in her voice. "It's important. Richard's been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4, and there's been a problem with our insurance." I agreed to meet them at my office the next day. Not the cramped hospital space where I'd worked during my treatment, but my new corner office in the gleaming Thompson Center for Integrative Oncology. Yes, I'd kept my married name for the center, savoring the irony. They arrived precisely on time, of course. Old habits die hard. But everything else about them had changed. Margaret's designer clothes seemed worn, her perfectly maintained appearance showing cracks around the edges. Richard, once intimidatingly robust, looked frail in his expensive suit. "Thank you for seeing us," Margaret began, perching on the edge of her chair. Her eyes darted around my office, taking in the modern art, the wall of medical certifications, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "This is quite impressive." "It is," I agreed, keeping my voice neutral. "Now, what seems to be the problem?" Richard shifted uncomfortably. "Our insurance. There's been a situation. The company I invested with, there were some irregularities." "What Richard means," Margaret cut in, "is that our insurance broker turned out to be running a Ponzi scheme. All our policies were fake. We've lost everything. Our coverage, our investments, her voice cracked slightly, our safety net." I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch. Through my window, I could see construction crews working on the center's new wing. The patient support services building, featuring financial counseling, mental health services, and a foundation to help with treatment costs. "Go on," I said finally. "The diagnosis came 3 weeks ago," Margaret continued. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It's aggressive. The doctors at Mayo Clinic say without immediate treatment." She trailed off, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "And the treatment costs?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I'd seen the Mayo Clinic protocols. The center is going to evaluate them like any other patients, I corrected. If they qualify for assistance, they'll receive it. If not, we'll work out a payment plan. He was quiet for a moment, running his fingers through my hair, now grown back curly and silver instead of its original straight brown. You're a better person than they are. No, I shook my head. I just understand something they never did. Healing isn't just about medicine. It's about dignity, compassion, and giving people the chance to become better versions of themselves. The next few months were a study in ironies. Richard and Margaret did qualify for the center's financial assistance program. Their total assets now fell well below the threshold. Richard began an aggressive treatment protocol under one of my colleagues' care. I had removed myself from his case to avoid any conflict of interest. I saw them occasionally in the center's hallways. Just over $300,000, Richard spoke up, his voice rough. Without insurance, we don't have the money. I finished for him. Even with all your careful investments, the real estate deals, the retirement accounts you've managed for others. They flinched at my tone. Good. Sarah. Margaret leaned forward, trying for her old commanding presence but falling short. We know we handled things badly with your situation. We were wrong. But surely you understand, as a doctor, as someone who's been through this, we need help. Richard needs help. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the city sprawling below. You know what I remember most about my diagnosis? Not the pain, not the fear, not even the financial stress. I remember sitting in that hospital room, reading your text message about how helping with my treatment wouldn't be a prudent investment. We were wrong, Margaret repeated, her voice small. Yes, you were. But not just about me. I turned back to face them. You were wrong about what matters in life. Wrong about the value of money versus the value of compassion. Wrong about how to treat family, patients, everyone. I picked up a folder from my desk and handed it to them. These are the intake forms for our center. We treat everyone, regardless of their ability to pay. Our foundation covers costs for patients who can't afford treatment. Our financial counselors help arrange payment plans, navigate insurance appeals, and protect patients' assets. They stared at the papers, uncomprehending. You're offering to treat Richard? Margaret asked hesitantly. I'm offering him the same thing we offer every patient who walks through our doors: hope, respect, and medical care based on need rather than net worth. I sat back down, meeting their eyes steadily. The center's board will review your application just like anyone else's. If you qualify for financial assistance, you'll receive it. No special treatment, no exceptions. But we're family, Margaret protested weakly. Are we? I asked quietly. Where was that family feeling when I needed you? When David and I were selling our car, mortgaging our house, working ourselves to exhaustion to pay for my treatment. Richard spoke up, his voice barely a whisper. The money, your retirement account, we lost it. The same Ponzi scheme. Everything's gone. I wasn't surprised. Karma, it seemed, had a sense of irony. Fill out the forms, I said, standing to indicate our meeting was over. Our financial counselors will contact you to begin the qualification process. And Richard? I added as they stood to leave. Don't skip the psychological support services. Cancer treatment isn't just about the body. You need to heal your mind and spirit too. They left clutching the folder like a lifeline, looking smaller somehow in my large, sunlit office. David was waiting outside, having deliberately stayed away from the meeting. How did it go? He asked, closing my office door. About as expected, I sighed, letting him pull me into a hug. They've lost everything. And your father, it doesn't look good. And you're going to help them. His voice was carefully neutral. Margaret spent hours in the financial counseling office, learning to navigate Medicare applications and assistance programs. The woman who once sneered at common people now sat in support groups, sharing her fears with others facing similar battles. Richard's treatment was brutal, but he faced it with unexpected grace. The man who had once dismissed me as beneath his family's status now thanked every nurse, orderly, and cleaning staff member by name. During his chemo sessions, he worked with our patient advocate team, sharing his story to help us secure additional funding for the foundation. One evening, about 6 months into his treatment, I found Margaret sitting alone in our rooftop garden, a peaceful space we created for patients and families to rest and reflect. It's beautiful up here, she said without turning around. You can see the whole city. I sat down beside her. How's Richard doing? The latest scan showed some tumor shrinkage, she said, then laughed softly. Listen to me, using medical terms like I know what they mean. 6 months ago, I couldn't even say the word cancer without flinching. We sat in silence for a while, watching the sun set over the city. I've been thinking about your retirement account, she said finally. The money we took, even though it's gone, we still owe it to you. The money isn't important anymore, I replied. What matters is what we do with the time we have, how we treat people, what we leave behind. She turned to look at me, her eyes filled with tears. How do you do it? How do you face this every day? All this pain, all these battles, and still find the strength to help people? Even people who hurt you? I thought about my own journey, about the dark nights and bright mornings, about the patients who had become family and the family who had become strangers. Because every person who walks through those doors is more than their worst decisions, I said finally, including you and Richard. A week later, I received a package from them. Inside was a formal letter apologizing for their past behavior, along with a legal document transferring ownership of their vacation property to the center's foundation. To help other families fighting this battle, the note read, and to begin making amends. Richard's condition stabilized enough for him to attend the opening ceremony for the center's new wing. He sat in his wheelchair, Margaret by his side, as I cut the ribbon and made my speech about accessibility, dignity, and second chances. Today, we're not just opening a building, I told the gathered crowd. We're opening doors for people who thought they had run out of options. We're creating a space where healing isn't limited by bank accounts, where compassion isn't rationed by status, where every patient is treated with the dignity they deserve. I saw tears in Margaret's eyes as she applauded, saw Richard nodding in understanding. They had learned the hard way what I had known all along, that true wealth isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the lives we touch and the changes we inspire. David squeezed my hand as we watched the first patients enter the new wing. You did it, he whispered. You turned their betrayal into something beautiful. We did it, I corrected him. All of us. Every patient who shared their story, every donor who believed in our vision, every staff member who puts compassion first. Even your parents, their story will help us help others. Richard passed away 6 months later, peacefully in our hospice unit. In his final days, he worked with our legal team to share his story, testifying about insurance fraud and financial abuse in cancer care. His statement helped pass legislation requiring better oversight of medical insurance providers. Margaret volunteers at the center now, 3 days a week. She works with newly diagnosed patients, helping them navigate the overwhelming maze of paperwork, insurance, and financial planning. Her expertise in finance, once used to build walls, now helps build bridges for families in crisis. Last week, she brought me a cup of coffee during a late night at the office. I never properly thanked you, she said, sitting across from my desk, not just for Richard's treatment, but for showing us a better way to live. I accepted the coffee with a smile. That's the thing about healing. It works in both directions. Sometimes the people we help end up helping us become stronger, wiser, more compassionate. Is that why you named it the Thompson Center? She asked. Even after everything we did. I named it that because names have power, I replied. And sometimes the best revenge is showing people a better version of themselves than they ever imagined they could be. Today, the Thompson Center for Integrative Oncology treats thousands of patients annually. Our sliding scale payment model has been adopted by medical centers across the country. The Patient Support Foundation, seated with Richard and Margaret's vacation property, has helped hundreds of families avoid the financial devastation that almost destroyed us. And every morning when I walk through those doors, I remember my own battle, not just against cancer, but against fear, against bitterness, against the temptation to turn away from those who once turned away from me. Because sometimes the greatest victory isn't in making others suffer as we suffered, but in ensuring that no one else has to suffer the same way. The garden on our rooftop has grown more beautiful with time. Patients and their families find peace among its winding paths and quiet corners. And sometimes in the early morning light, I sit there and reflect on how life's hardest moments can lead us to our greatest purpose, if we're brave enough to let healing flow both ways.